Welcome to Evil Done Badly, the most incompetent and useless true crime podcast on the internet. As usual, we have no talent, no budget, and no sound quality. As an added bonus, we've decided to stop thinking for ourselves and decided to be trendy assholes and go ahead and cover the serial killer known as BTK. He seems to be a popular subject amongst high-quality true crime podcasts, so there's no reason we can't cover him on this one as well. Now, his real name is Dennis Rader, and he is pure evil and one arrogant son of a bitch. You've heard about this fucker before, but you haven't heard his story quite like this. Let's get cracking and cue the theme song. This episode is brought to you by the fine folks at Flunky's Fish Market. Are you tired of nibbling on your own nipples? Get yourself a set of Flunky's titty nippers and never be lonely again. Starter pack available, which includes tank, gravel, and a can of Flunky's soothing tit wax. Mention this podcast when you call and we will ignore you. Now back to the show. Let's talk about Dennis Lynn Rader. Now, his middle name is Lynn, so I'm pretty sure his mom wanted a girl. And she doesn't go out of her way to make him feel any different. Anyways, he's an American serial killer known as BTK, an abbreviation he gave himself for bind, torture, and kill. The BTK Strangler or the BTK Killer. So right off the bat, you know he's full of himself. He named himself an abbreviation so you know he wanted to be immortalized like Son of Sam or the Zodiac Killer, and all that just makes him a cocky cunt of a prick. You might be thinking to yourself by now, this guy must have had a fucked up childhood. It's a pretty common theme among psychopaths. So let's look into it. Rader was born on March 9th, 1945, and grew up in Wichita, Kansas. Both his parents were highly religious, we know that's a bad sign right there, and worked long hours, and the children were largely ignored. While the children were never outright abused, Rader would later describe feeling abandoned by, primarily, his mother, and hating her for it. Ignored or not, she found it satisfying to shame little Dennis whenever she could. She found jizz in his drawers one day and enjoyed humiliating him about it. She told him that God would kill him if he found out he was masturbating. From what I can tell, Rader is not the most trustworthy guy though, and his accounts of his own past could be completely made up. He'd pretty much say anything if he thought it would help expand his legendary psycho status. He has never admitted to banging his mom, but nobody rules that out. From a young age, Rader harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing trapped and helpless women. He would cut pictures of girls out of magazines and draw gags and ropes on them. He found an easy way to make the Sears catalog titillating, if you're into that sort of thing. He also was not nice to small animals and often hanged them as a child. His sexual sadism extended beyond species, as he could pretty much find any suffering erotic. Rader had a penchant for voyeurism and often spied on female neighbors, not only peeking at them, but peeking while dressed in women's clothing. Sometimes even peeking at them while wearing women's underwear that he had stolen. Now, it's fuckers like this guy that give the rest of us crossdressers a bad name. He enjoyed a little bit of autoerotic asphyxiation. He liked tying himself up and smothering himself while he was getting off. If he had done a better job of choking himself, we wouldn't be doing this episode here today. And that wouldn't be a bad thing. I mean, I could always find some other sicko to babble about. When he wasn't murdering people, he found a workaround. He was so into the sexual binding thing He would tie himself up and take pictures of himself with a female mask on. That makes him dementedly resourceful, I guess, if nothing else. So, what I'm saying here is there was definitely a ton of red flags in this guy's history. This guy was bound to be trouble once he was let off the leash. Should we have seen this coming? Probably not. Despite his assorted perverted fetishes and violent tendencies, he managed to keep his deranged fantasy life well hidden. He was widely known in the community as normal, polite, and well mannered. He did a bunch of normal sounding things after graduating high school. He briefly attended university and spent a few years in the Air Force. He worked in the meat department at an IGA and got married and had 2 kids. He went back to school, got a couple of degrees, and went to work making camp stoves at Coleman. All that sounds pretty good. He was also a member of the Christ Lutheran Church and a Cub Scout leader. By all accounts, he had a fairly typical career and family life. Though, cracks did start to show publicly. His inner cunt started to come out when he became a dog catcher and compliance officer in 1991. He seemed to enjoy being overbearing and strict when encountering single ladies, using his position to bully and harass them. And according to one of his neighbors, he outright killed her dog for no goddamn reason. He spent 14 years at ADT installing security systems, oftentimes to people who were concerned about the BTK killings. How's that for fucking convenient? The murders begin on January 15th, 1974, when 4 members of the Otero family were murdered in Wichita. Rader waited by the back door of their house and forced his way in when one of the children let the dog out. He started ordering the family around at gunpoint and bound all 4 members' hands and feet. He systematically attempted to smother them one by one with bags and ropes, but it took multiple tries to kill each of them. When the daughter didn't die on the first attempt, he took her down into the basement and hung her. He found the whole thing very arousing. The victims were Joseph Otero, age 38, who would wind up being Rader's only successful male kill. It wasn't Rader's intention for the father to be home at the time, but he ended up meeting the same unfortunate end as the other 3 family members. The coward, known as BTK, only intended to kill Julie Otero, age 33, Joseph Otero Jr., age 9, and Josephine Otero, age 11. Their bodies were discovered by the family's 3 older children, Charlie, Danny, and Carmen, who had been at school at the time of the killings. What a fucking tragedy, and this cunt is still alive watching TV somewhere. A month after the Otero murders, Rader sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle claiming responsibility for the murders. Police had 3 suspects in custody pertaining to the murders, but Rader took full credit for them and said that he worked alone. He went on to describe the crime scenes to an extent that the police were convinced they were dealing with the right guy. I'm guessing the other 3 dudes, as Rader called them, were set free shortly after. In this letter, he dubbed his murderous alter ego the Monster. He also wished the authorities good luck hunting because he couldn't control his urges and would be continuing his bloody game indefinitely. It was at the end of this first letter where he bestowed the BTK moniker upon himself. Between the spring of 1974 and winter 1977, Rader killed 3 more women: Catherine Bright, Shirley Ralford, and Nancy Fox. Catherine Bright and her brother Kevin came home one day to find Rader lurking there. He held them at gunpoint and ordered them to tie each other up. Rader then fumbled around trying to strangle them, and eventually Kevin got free and scuffled with him. Kevin would wind up getting shot twice in the face. Rader would then turn his attention back to Catherine. It was the only time Rader would deviate from his normal strangling MO. He couldn't contain her sufficiently to choke her to death, so he stabbed her 3 times, and she would eventually succumb to her wounds. Kevin, who, again, Rader was not expecting to have to deal with, would make his escape to be the only known survivor of a BTK attack. Shirley Van Relford was stripped, bound, and strangled by Rader after being led in the house by her children. The children were locked in the bathroom and were well aware of what was going on as their mom was being killed. These poor little shits had to carry this trauma with them for the rest of their lives. I can only imagine how emotionally damaged they are, and I hope they have found some way to cope with this horrific loss. By the time Rader had gotten around to killing Nancy Fox, he had done his homework. He knew her name, address, place of employment, and her working hours. He was meticulous that way. He had stalked lots of potential victims, but not all of them were attacked. Many girls caught his eye, but only a small percentage of them would wind up paying the ultimate price. He claims to have stalked around 55 people. He went to Nancy's house and knocked to make sure no one was home. He then went to the back door and cut the phone line. He then broke in and waited in the kitchen for her to come home. When Nancy arrived, he confronted her and told her he had sexual problems and he needed to tie her up and have sex with her. According to Rader, Nancy was a little upset by this. Also, according to Rader, they talked about it over cigarettes and she was resigned to letting him have his way with her. She went to the bathroom and came back undressed for him. He handcuffed her, had her lay on the bed, and tied her feet. He would have you believe she sort of agreed with all this. I doubt it. This is coming from Rader. Take it for what it's worth, which is fuck all. All we really know is that he eventually got around to strangling her with a belt. After he had killed her, he masturbated, got dressed, and went looking through the house for personal items he could keep as souvenirs. In early 1978, Rader sent another letter to television station KAKE in Wichita. He was claiming responsibility for the murders of the Oteros, Bright, Van Relford, and Fox. Rader's ego was on full display here as he asked, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national recognition?" He would begin taunting the authorities more extensively around this time. He would send more letters, packages, and elaborate word search puzzles for them to solve. It was all a big game to him as he would cut out more pictures of women from magazines, draw them being tied up and tortured, and sending them to the police and the media. Rader enjoyed the whole process of mocking the authorities just as much as he enjoyed the killings themselves, or the hits as he used to call them when referring to them. Wichita police would then go on the record as saying there was a serial killer on the loose. They couldn't keep the public in the dark about the murders any longer. Victim number 8 would be Maureen Hedge. She was aged 53 and was found on May 5th, 1985 at East 53rd Street North between North Webb Road and North Greenwich Road in Wichita. Rader had snuck into her house on April 27th, and when she came home, she had a male friend with her. Rader decided to stay quiet and wait him out. The male left about an hour later, but Rader was extra patient this evening and waited for her to go to sleep. In the early morning, he flicked the light switch on in the bathroom, and when she started to scream, he jumped on top of her and strangled her with his hands. He then stripped the body and looted her purse and her house for some personal items. He then wrapped her in a blanket, took her dead body to the church, the Christ Lutheran Church, where he was president of the church council, and there he tied her up and took Polaroids of her body in various bondage positions. Rader had previously stored black plastic sheets and other materials at the church in preparation for the murder, and then later dumped the body in a ditch, covering it with brush. In 1986, Rader would claim his penultimate victim, Vicky Wegerle. She would let him into her house as he was posing as a telephone repairman. When he got inside, he pretended to fiddle with her phone a bit before pulling a gun on her and ordering her to go back to the bedroom. According to Rader, she was very upset at the prospect of being raped by this cunt. He tied her up with whatever he could find in the room, but she would bravely free herself and fight back. Rader would finally overpower her and strangle her unconscious with a nylon stocking. There was a lot of commotion with the struggle, and the dogs in the house were kicking up a fuss, so Rader quickly rummaged through her purse, found her car keys, and made off with her vehicle. This was not before rearranging her clothes and taking 3 pictures of her dying body as mementos. Vicky would succumb to her injuries sometime shortly after Rader had made his escape. In 1988, 3 members of the Fager family in Wichita were murdered. As full of himself as he was, Rader wouldn't stoop to taking credit for this particular triple homicide. He wrote a letter and denied being the perpetrator of the Fager murders. Not only did he not take credit for the murders, he credited the killer with having done admirable work. His final victim, Dolores E. Davis, was found on February 1st, 1991. Rader killed her on January 19th. He had broken into her house with a brick through a window. He handcuffed her, told her he was a wanted man and needed a place to hide out, food, and her car. He said this kind of reassured her and calmed her down a little bit. How being handcuffed by a wanted man in your own house can be in any way reassuring is beyond me. Now, this is, of course, coming from Rader himself, so it may or may not be true. He then went around the house, stole a few things, pretended to make food, and let her think he was leaving. He eventually came back, took the handcuffs off, and then tied her up. He then looted some more, and then strangled her to death. He would then use either her car or his own to dump the body under a bridge. And this murder would bring an end to his rampage, but not to the legend of BTK. The case would fade out and be considered a cold case for the next 13 years. Whether it was ego, or guilt, or boredom, or some combination of the 3, the monstrous side of Rader would reawaken and initiate a series of communications to the local media. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter from someone using the name Bill Thomas Kilman, the initials of which would spell out BTK. He was probably patting himself on the back for being so clever. Surely someone so clever wouldn't be too smart to get caught, especially since no one was really looking for him anymore. Nope. The arrogant bastard decided it was time to get his name back in the papers. His letter claimed that he had murdered Vicky Wegerle on September 16th, 1986, and enclosed photographs of the crime scene, and a photocopy of her driver's license, which had been stolen at the time. Interestingly, this murder wasn't even linked to the BTK killings until Rader decided he needed some more notoriety. DNA collected from under Wegerle's fingernails provided police with previously unknown evidence. They then began DNA testing hundreds of men in an effort to find the serial killer. Altogether, more than 1,300 DNA samples were run against the sample found at the crime scene, all to no avail. Rader was no closer to being caught, but he couldn't help himself. He needed more attention. He would continue to poke the proverbial bear. On June 9th, a package was found taped to a stop sign at the corner of First and Kansas roads. It had graphic descriptions of the Otero murders and a sketch labeled, "The Sexual Thrill is My Bill." Also enclosed was a chapter list for a proposed book titled The BTK Story, Chapter 1. This stupid cunt was already writing his autobiography. He could not be any more full of himself. In July, a package dropped into the return slot at a public library contained more fucked up items, including the claim that he was responsible for the death of 19-year-old Jake Allen in Argonia, Kansas earlier that month. This claim was false, and the death was ruled a suicide. This is the first time he laid claim to a murder that he didn't do. I guess he needed a little help in the PR department after laying dormant for the last decade or so. He was so desperate to stir up controversy, he began taking credit for other tragedies. What little integrity he had left was a thing of the past. In October 2004, a manila envelope was dropped into a UPS box in Wichita. It contained disturbing images depicting the terror and bondage of children and a poem threatening the life of lead investigator Lieutenant Ken Landwehr. These details were later released to the public. In 2004, December, Wichita police received another package from the BTK killer. This time, the package was found in Wichita's Murdoch Park. It had the driver's license of Nancy Fox, which was stolen from the crime scene, as well as a doll that was symbolically bound at the hands and feet and had a plastic bag tied over its head. In January 2005, Rader attempted to leave a cereal box in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot in Wichita. The box wound up being discarded by the truck's owner. Of course, Rader was annoyed at this, so he asked the police what had become of it. Police looked at the surveillance tape from the date that Rader said he left it there, and sure enough, the tape revealed a distant figure driving a black Jeep Cherokee, leaving the box in the pickup. In February 2005, more postcards were sent to KAKE, and another cereal box was left at a rural location, and it was found to contain another doll in restraints. Rader had to be feeling pretty much invincible at this point. He was a free man and not on anybody's radar at all. In his letters to police, Rader asked them if his writings, when they were put on a floppy disk, could they be traced back to him or not. The police answered his question in a newspaper ad posted in the Wichita Eagle, saying that communicating via floppy disk would be untraceable. In a bafflingly naive twist, Rader bought this and believed them and sent a purple Memorex floppy disk to Fox affiliate KSAS TV in Wichita. Police found metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document that was, unknown to Rader, still stored on the floppy disk. Now, either Rader just bungled his whole criminal career in a blindingly gullible way, or he knew what he was doing and deep down he wanted to be caught. In any event, the metadata contained the words Christ Lutheran Church, and the document was marked as last modified by Dennis. An internet search determined that a Dennis Rader was president of the church council. When investigators drove by Rader's house, ding ding ding, a black Jeep Cherokee was parked outside. The case was beginning to take shape. Now, this looked bad for Rader, but the authorities needed more direct evidence in order to detain him. Now, the authorities had another suspect to run against the DNA sample found under Vicky Wegerle's fingernails. But they had to be sneaky about getting his DNA. They didn't want him catching wind that they might be onto him. So instead of going directly after Rader's DNA, they learned that his daughter Carrie had yearly pap smears at Kansas State University. Police obtained a warrant to surreptitiously test Carrie's DNA, and they came back with a familial match between the pap smear and the sample from Wegerle's fingernails. The results showed that the killer was undoubtedly closely related to Rader's daughter. Combined with other incriminating circumstantial evidence, it was enough for police to arrest Rader. In only a couple of months, his 30-year legacy of terror came to a grinding halt. Rader was arrested while driving near his home in Park City shortly after noon on February 25, 2005. The officer asked, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" Rader replied, "Oh, I have my suspicions why." Wichita Police, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and ATF agents would search Rader's home and vehicle, seizing evidence including computer equipment, a pair of black pantyhose from his shed. I'm sorry, that strikes me as funny for no good reason. I know that's where I keep my black pantyhose. I keep my pink ones in my sock drawer. And a cylindrical container, which no one seems to know the contents of. The church he attended, his office at City Hall, and the main branch of the Park City Library were also searched. At a press conference the next morning, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams announced, "The bottom line, BTK is arrested." After his capture, Rader admitted in his interrogation that he'd been planning to kill again, and he had set a date, October 2004, and was stalking his next intended victim. Now, to me, that just sounds like somebody tried to save face and act tough after he got nabbed. Rader would ultimately confess to and be charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. Despite multi-state investigations into various other unsolved murders, he is not considered a suspect in any other unsolved cases. Now, he probably would have come clean if he was responsible for more killings. God knows he would have loved to add a few notches to his tally. Rader currently spends his time locked up and having his tiny wiener roasted on a Coleman camp stove. Or at least he should be. There was no death penalty in Kansas at the time, so he is currently serving 10 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He's currently in solitary confinement for his protection. Poor guy. Wouldn't want him being uncomfortable, and you wouldn't want anybody giving him a hard time. He gets an hour of activity time a day and 3 showers a week. As of 2006, on account of his good behavior, he's allowed to watch TV and read magazines. I hope he's not allowed to listen to poor quality podcasts like this one, though. The funny thing is, legend has it that Rader was actually appalled that the police went and lied to him in order to catch him about the floppy disk thing. I mean, really, that's going pretty low when the police are lying to you about how to catch this goddamn murderer. And there you have it. This has been an Evil Done Badly discussion of Dennis Rader, the egotistical fucker known as BTK. He almost got away, with the senseless murders of 10 innocent people. It took a while, but at least justice was finally served when his need to be noticed became his undoing. My heart goes out to the families of the poor victims and anyone whose life has been impacted by the actions of this cunt. I can only imagine the emotions his family must have endured when it became clear that they'd been living with this monster for the last 30 fucking years. I hope you enjoyed this episode, grim as it was. I can be reached on Instagram at evildonebadly or by email at evildonebadly@gmail.com if you would like to suggest topics for future episodes. Thanks for listening.